My name is Ryan Evans. You mostly know me as the editor-in-chief of War on the Rocks, but I'm also the publisher of a new journal called the Texas National Security Review, which we at War on the Rocks produce with the University of Texas. Check it out at tnsr.org. This is the first episode of a new podcast called Horns of a Dilemma. It features the many thinkers and leaders who work at and visit the various centers and institutions of the University of Texas. We'll be featuring the first 2 or 3 episodes on the War on the Rocks feed, but you can and should subscribe yourself to Horns of a Dilemma on your podcast app of choice. Fittingly, the first episode is a conversation on leadership, especially in national security. Moderated by William Inboden, the director of the Clements Center and editor-in-chief of the Texas National Security Review, this discussion features Admiral William McRaven, the chancellor of the University of Texas System, John Brennan, former director of the CIA and now senior advisor to the Intelligence Studies Project at UT, Admiral Bobby Inman, the Lyndon B. Johnson Centennial Chair in National Policy at UT, former director of the NSA and former deputy director of Central Intelligence, and finally Julián Castro, the Dean's Distinguished Fellow at the LBJ School of Public Affairs, former Secretary of Housing and Urban Development under Barack Obama, and Mayor of San Antonio before that. Now, over to Will.
A bit of an introductory experiment. I started trying to tabulate the number of people who have been under their direct leadership in some form or another, their subjects, if you will, and also tried to tabulate the number of years, of decades of combined leadership experience here. But I'm just a historian. It was a lot more than I could count. It's a lot higher than I could count. But anyway, let's just say that we are very privileged to have such a range of experiences and wisdom here. Each of our panelists is going to start off with a couple minutes of opening reflections on what leadership means, and then I'm going to go through some questions here, and we'll want to finally after that, for the last part of the program, hear from the audience. So first up, Director Brennan, share a couple thoughts on.
Well, thank you, Will, and it's great to be back here at the University of Texas. And thinking about leadership, what I believe is one of the most essential quality of leadership is a good University of Texas education. I was fortunate to have that many years ago here at UT. But when I think about leadership, and I think about those leaders who I have most admired and the ones who have been most successful, their leadership was basically the manifestation of the experiences that they had throughout the course of their lives. And they then had the opportunity to demonstrate that leadership by following through with those principles, the guiding star, the North Star, as I call it, that leads them in every aspect of their lives. I was very fortunate to have a mother and father that taught me early on about the distinction between right and wrong and what it means to be a good person and how to treat others with dignity and making sure that I was able to show to others the qualities that I valued and those principles that guided me. I'm also a very strong proponent of early childhood development. Given that my wife right now is very much involved in trying to make sure that the young generation of Americans, including and where she works with the migrant communities, have the opportunity to thrive and to flourish. And those ages between 0 and 5 are so important to be able to instill in these young individuals those traits, those qualities, those values that are going to be very important throughout the course of their lives. So as one goes up through the ranks, and I had the great honor and distinction to be referred to as the director of CIA, not because I was smarter or better than others. I had opportunities that were given to me, people who took time to mentor and coach me. And I was able to then live out sort of my experiences in those leadership positions. So again, I think that leaders emerge through the course, certainly of their early lives, and then have the opportunity to live those values, those qualities, and those experiences that are most important in terms of making sure one is a successful and a good leader.
Yeah, thanks, Will. I tell you, you can't be a military guy, I don't think, without quoting Karl von Clausewitz, who was the 18th century Prussian general who wrote the seminal book on war. And there's a great quote on war where Clausewitz says, "Everything in war is easy. It's just the easy things are difficult." So everything in war is easy. It's just the easy things are difficult. I think this is like leadership. When you think of leadership, I could get up on a whiteboard and tell you all the things you need to know about leadership. Lead from the front, set the example, do all those sort of things. It's just hard to do. One of the first questions I'm almost always asked about leadership is, are great leaders born, or can you make great leaders? And I'll tell you what I've found in my 37 years in the military is you can absolutely take young men and women and turn them into very, very good leaders. You do that by instilling in them, again, a sense of values, a sense of integrity, a sense of honor. You teach them how to communicate. You teach them how to lead in small groups and in larger groups, and back to the experience. You have to have these experiences as you grow, but they can absolutely become good leaders. I will offer, however, that I think great leaders, there's got to be something in their DNA that is a little bit different. They have to have all those qualities of the good leaders, but the ones I've seen that are great have, for lack of a better term, kind of an emotional quotient where they can be around a group of men or women, they can be around an audience, they can see things, they can feel things that maybe other people just don't see or feel. And that allows them to interact in a way, I think, that even very good leaders sometimes struggle with. So when you think about what can be taught, the first thing we learn in the military is take care of the troops and the troops will take care of you. And I think that's about as simple as it comes when you're thinking about leadership or leading in a group of anything, again, a small group or a large group. The question then becomes, what does it mean to take care of the troops? I think when I first got to the SEAL teams, there was a sense that the enlisted guys would come up to me and say, hey, sir, you got to take care of the troops. That means you got to let us off on Friday. You got to make sure we got plenty of beer in the keg. You got to have all the... And you realize very quickly that's not what taking care of the troops is about. In any great organization, the first thing you have to do is you have to set the standard for excellence. I don't care whether it's a football team, an LBJ school, or a University of Texas system. You have to set the standards. Then you have to give folks the resources to meet those standards. So sometimes people would tell me, well, I set the standards and the expectations, and the folks working for me just weren't able to achieve it. And then you have to ask, but did you give them the resources? Did you give them the money? Did you give them the time? Did you give them the latitude to do the job? Set the expectations, set the standards, give them the resources, and then hold them accountable. If you do those things, then you will be able to lead a great organization. A book I would offer to you, it's an old one. You're going to have to search it on Amazon or someplace in the dusty archives, written by John Baines, called Morale. And the book talks about the 2nd Scottish Rifles. And this was a brigade level organization back around World War I, British, UK. And they were an abysmal unit. And then all of a sudden, because a new commander came in, set certain standards, held people accountable, they went into World War I and the Battle of Neuve-Chapelle in particular, and were one of the most distinguished units there. And you recognize the value of those little things about setting the standards, making sure you give people the resources and hold them accountable. And the last thing I'll talk about is, and John mentioned it, particularly in today's environment. I have an opportunity to talk to the presidents and the faculty and folks a lot of times. And I tell them, the one thing you have to do as a leader is the right thing. Do the right thing. There's an old quote from the Texas Rangers: we did the right thing because it was right. Pretty profound, actually. We did the right thing because it was right. In today's environment, do the right thing. If you do the right thing, you will always be able to stand before the long green table and address people's concerns. If you don't do the right thing, you end up like some of the institutions we've seen lately, or you end up like Enron. I mean, you have to do the right thing. Do things that are moral, legal, and ethical. Those are the 3 litmus tests that I have in every decision we make. I think if you do those sort of things, you'll find you're as good a leader as you hope you can be.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, and it's good to be here with such a distinguished panel. So just very briefly, and I know I've shared this story with some of the students, I went into public service because I got interested in public service after I went away from my home community of San Antonio, and I could compare the San Francisco Bay Area, my brother and I went to Stanford, to the community that I'd come from. And I saw that in the Bay Area in the early 90s, that place was a lot more innovative and more well-educated, had higher income levels, more ready for the future. In my hometown, it was a place that still felt connected, where the shorthand that I use is if you were in a restaurant and you sneezed, 2 or 3 people would still say, bless you. There's still a sense of connection among folks. And so my interest in going into public service was, how could you create the best of both worlds in a city? Well-educated, ready for the future, had good income and opportunity, but also a place where people still felt a common sense of identity. They still felt connected to each other. And so as Director Brennan and Chancellor McRaven have made clear, There are a lot of things that we could talk about when it comes to leadership, but let me just focus on the one that I've paid particular attention to over the years, which is vision. I think especially in the realm of public service and electoral public service, the vision that you have counts. Being able to articulate what you're going to do if people put their trust in you, essentially hire you into that position. And remember, in public service, if you're an elected official, you don't have a boss except the people that elected you. And so there's nobody there that can literally on that day fire you. I know sometimes people wish there was a way, but that means that you owe, I think, an extra obligation to folks to let them know what your vision is. And I've found that the most compelling leaders, whether at a company or in public service or a nonprofit, are those that do have a very strong vision for where they want the organization to go. Now, there's a lot more that goes into whether you can actually execute that vision and lead on it. But to me, that's one of the most fascinating aspects of leadership is that vision that you have from the beginning.
I have been very privileged. 31 years government, Navy, 35 years private sector, pretty broadly across business world, 27 years now paralleling in the academic world. But fundamental skills of leadership I learned in my very first job in the Navy on an aircraft carrier in combat, 37 enlisted people in the division doing communications. Lieutenant was a division officer. I was the assistant division officer, given maintain good order and discipline. Half of them were older than I was. I got wonderful coaching, mentoring from Chief Petty Officer, from senior enlisted. What I learned, you manage things. You manage paper. You lead people. And to do that, you've got to be interested in them. You've got to know what are their problems? What are their challenges? What are they concerned about? Having a 19-year-old who already had 2 children coming for advice on how to handle his finances. Just the whole array. But the exposure to what are the needs and the concerns of those you want to lead. And then echoing very much early on, you got to know where it is you want to go. And you got to be able to articulate with some clarity, where is it you want people to follow you in this process? There is an image that military officers just issue orders. There's some of that, particularly in times of combat when you have to react almost instantaneously. But for the vast bulk of the effort, it's not giving orders, it's leading.
So my first question to our panelists here, and I'll want to hear answers from all 4 of you, concerns the challenge of leading large organizations, whether it's CIA, NSA, SOCOM, HUD, the city of San Antonio, and all of those. You had tens of thousands, in some cases, a million people somehow under your leadership. It's impossible for you to actually know all of them. And of course, as Admiral was saying, part of leadership involves, certainly knowing the people in your care, but you can't know all of them personally. How do you lead an organization where you're never going to meet personally most of the people under your leadership? How do you connect with them?
Well, I think it's critically important for a leader to be able to communicate on a regular basis with their organization. As you say, you can't meet everybody in your organization, but you can meet an awful lot. Mm-hmm. You can get down in the trenches, you can meet the troops, you can shake their hands, you can listen to them, listen to what their concerns are, elicit from them input. Because no matter who you are, you're not going to be, have a monopoly on the truth or knowledge. And you try to make sure they understand that you are interested in what their concerns are, what their aspirations are, what their vision is for the organization. And so I don't believe that you can over-communicate, but also to demonstrate that you are not just listening to them, but you're actually absorbing it and you're going to try to act upon it. It's very important for there to be demonstrations of sort of leadership actions. And I couldn't agree more as far as the vision thing, as far as making sure that you're going to do things that's for the good of the organization. And no organization is going to be monolithic in terms of their views. And frequently there are a lot of dissenting views in terms of what a leader wants to do. But that's where it's the leader's responsibility to take into account what the institution needs, what the people need, and to go forward and recognizing that there are going to be headwinds there. But you want to make sure that you do things in a thoughtful way, making sure you do it with appropriate deliberation, but then also be able to explain to people what it is you're doing and why you're doing it. But if a leader is going to stay within the ivory tower with doors closed, there's going to be a distance then, both literally and figuratively, from the people. You need to demonstrate that you are one of them, and you have special obligations, responsibilities that you're going to carry out, almost irrespective of whether or not there's going to be, headwinds that are coming forward.
Director Brennan's use of the phrase ivory tower makes you a natural follow. Chancellor McRaven, how do you lead the ivory tower without getting stuck in the ivory tower?
Well, I'll go back. Admiral Inman said one of the best lessons he learned was when he was a young naval officer. Mine actually even was before that. When I was a midshipman here going through the ROTC program, between your freshman and sophomore year, during that summer, you went on what was euphemistically called a cruise. But the intent was, as a budding officer, I went out and was an enlisted man for 8 weeks on board a fast frigate. And probably the most important lesson I learned from those 8 weeks was the decisions the officers made on that ship and the impact and the effect they had on the enlisted guys. So as an enlisted midshipman, I was scrubbing the decks, I was down in the boiler room, I'm chipping paint, you're cleaning the latrines, the heads, you're doing all the sort of things the enlisted guys do, and you begin to understand this thing we call professional distance. And back to John's point, you can't sit in the ivory tower. You have to get out about and amongst the troops to understand the implications of your decision. If that professional distance ever gets too far, if you as a leader are so far removed from the people that you're making decisions for and about, then you're going to make bad decisions. When I was in combat in Iraq or Afghanistan, I had to create a battle rhythm. And same thing I have to do here as the chancellor. And that battle rhythm says that I am going to carve out part of my day or my week to ensure that I am engaging with the staff, the universities, or in the case of the time in Iraq and Afghanistan, the troops. Once a week, I would go out on a visit to the troops somewhere on the battlefield. And to John's point, you had an opportunity to find out what they were doing, what they were thinking. And I always went with a very small group of people. There's not an entourage. It was generally me plus 2 people. And you could sit down, have a cup of coffee with them. They would tell you everything that was right and wrong about what you were doing. And that's incredibly important, because if the troops, whether they are the students, the faculty, the staff, or the real men and women in uniform, if they don't think they can tell you all that is kind of wrong with the organization, then you're never going to be in a position to fix it and to lead it. And the only way you know that is to get out and about and meet with them.
All right.
Yeah, I agree. Just a very quick story, at HUD, so we had about 8,000 employees and 55 different field offices, and one of those field offices was in Washington, D.C. So just to put an exclamation point on that, we had our headquarters in Washington, D.C., and then we had a field office in Washington, D.C. And so I made a point to try and go and visit these different field offices. I probably got up to 30 or 40 something of them. And the folks in the DC field office told me that it had been about 15 years since a HUD secretary had visited the Washington, D.C. field office. But so I completely agree with that point of, even though, yes, we're in organizations that are larger than your ability to perhaps meet every single employee, you can meet a lot of people and should make the effort. The other thing I would say is that I think that the larger the organization, the more important it is that you set that standard of excellence and people know the vision, they know the standard, and that you do things to listen and to empower them in their roles so they feel like they have ownership of the organization as well. Because the bigger the organization, the more spread out folks are, the more, the tendency is to feel like they're adrift and that they're not part of it. So you have to do everything that you can to bring them into the fold to listen and to empower as much as possible.
Admiral Inman.
You'll recognize some parallel experiences here in all this. I became the director of the National Security Agency on the 5th of July, 1977. 16,000 people in the Home Office, 80% civilian, 20% military. And I found very quickly they were very skilled at bearing the director around like the Pharaoh and then putting him down at the entrance, go deal with the outside world. The deputy would run, the civilian would run the agency. So I like to wander around. So I designated Tuesday afternoon, 3 hours. They could not schedule me. And I was going to wander around the agency. Oh, I heard frequently what a waste of time that was, losing all the rest of it. I wandered into an organization, G7, and there was a banner on the wall, just in case I might come. Welcome, Vice Admiral Inman. You're the first director to visit G7 since General Canine, the founding director, years ago in the process. The other problem I found, I had fairly sizable staff meetings, senior people, and I'd hold forth on things I thought were important. As I wandered around, I would ask questions. And it was very interesting. What I heard back about what I'd said was not what I thought I'd said, or what at least I'd intended to say. So I put together a small group of directors, advisors, young people, picked out military and civilian, and their job was to go wander around the agency and come back and just send me memos, what was going on their version. And then I'd do once a quarter, fill up the fairly large auditorium and give them a report card, how, in my view, the agency was doing for half an hour, and then answer questions for half an hour. And I would always make sure that there were at least 50 junior people in that gathering. And then when I would do wandering, I found they'd gone back and given their version of what I said, which again was not always what had been filtered through the senior ones. Contact, visibility, very important parts of leadership.
All right, so my next question, and Admiral Inman, just to tee you up, I'm going to put this one to you first. So we're reversing order here. So Director Brennan, you get plenty of time to ponder on this one. I know. Next question has to do with the relationship between leadership and public opinion, especially in this current era we're in of populist passions and social media frenzies on the right and left and across the political spectrum. How does a leader stay in touch with his or her constituents or troops or subjects, or worst of all, faculty members, right? How do you stay in touch with the people under your leadership while not succumbing too much to some of the maybe less healthy passions and mob mentalities that can sometimes develop, especially in this current era? So.
Will, the world is changing at an incredibly fast pace, driven by social media. So I'm a little reluctant even in answering your question. I don't consume social media. I don't spend hours tweeting or texting, anything else.
And this might even be your first podcast, right?
Well, no, I did one fundraiser for a university.
Okay.
This is second one.
Okay.
I always found great value in direct conversations. You see body movements, you see reactions in the process. I hate talking to an audience where the spotlights are here and the audience is dark, because I can't see how people are reacting. Are they confused? Are they turned off? Now, how do you get any of that on social media in the process? So I worry in this leadership situation, there's a vast volume of information flowing. Is it accurate? Is it reliable? Is it timely? Is it relevant to the problems you have? I'm still struggling with that.
Secretary Castro.
Yeah, a couple of things. Number one, especially for folks that go into a public service, elected public service, you have to know what you fundamentally believe. some of the folks that I've seen get most in trouble in public office have been the folks that don't, at their core, don't fundamentally know what they believe, aren't attached to any core vision or core set of principles. And so, you know, when the moments come around and this is the fashionable way to go, or this way, they're more willing to do that. You know, obviously, some of that goes on in politics all the time, and some of it is I think more dangerous than other forms of it. But number one, know what you believe. Secondly, having that good mix of information, a balance of information. And I'll just take a granular example. A lot of times you'll go out and speak to constituents, for instance, and they'll talk to you about why something is a problem. And you know, you're speaking to folks, hearing their story, and you're completely on their side because it sounds like, yeah, you know, there's an injustice here or something really needs to get done. And then you'd go back and talk to staff and hear the reasons why something is being done the way that it's being done. And, you know, let's say 20% of the time you hear that and it's still not a good explanation, and you say, you know what, no, we have to change this. But a lot of the time you hear that and you understand, okay, even though I may want to change this and we need to work toward that, there's a reason why there's going to have to be a process, or that's why things are the way they are. And so we need to come up with a reasonable way to change it, and not just the knee-jerk kind of reaction. So knowing what you believe, and also a balance in the mix of information that you get, and having a practice of doing that, always reminding yourself to do it, I think will serve you well.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly couldn't agree more. You have to kind of know what your core fundamentals are, I think, whenever you're in a leadership position. You know, one of the things I've found here, which of course was entirely different than my time in the military, was that everything you say, every word you write is part of public record. I learned that the hard way early on here a couple times. As I wrote emails. I think
we've all learned that the hard way.
As I wrote emails, thinking those emails, not really thinking that they were going to be subject to TPIA, the Texas Public Information Act. But what I found in terms of communicating now is I write all of my key communications. I write them. And that's important because I don't want a statement to come out from the chancellor. I don't want some, with all due respect to our public relations folks who do a great job, I don't want it to be a canned piece of information. So generally once a week I write a blog, or if I'm going to write to the the large population of Texas alumni, I write it. And I want them to hear my words and the way I'm thinking and my passion and my potential issues with a particular situation. And that way, there is no doubt in anybody's mind that, okay, this is what McRaven is thinking. You may not like it, you may not agree with it, but at least it won't be misconstrued because I have put it down on paper or on social media or on YouTube or whatever it happens to be. And so I think the problems we run into today is that sometimes people's words get misconstrued. The good thing about today is you can go back and find exactly what somebody said over the last 10 years, and you can hold them accountable for that. So I would rather be leading that by saying, no, you're going to hear exactly from me. And I'm not going to tell you that, well, I hear what that statement said, but to be honest with you, that was my staffer that wrote that statement. No. If it's my statement, then it's my statement. And I think you have to communicate that way.
And I did make my bed this morning.
Okay. Sir, my guess is you've been making your bed for an awful long time.
All right. Director Brennan, leadership and public opinion.
Yeah. I think I'd be remiss, first of all, to say that the guy sitting next to me is one of the greatest leaders I ever had the privilege to work with. Some exceptionally difficult times, he really rose well above the occasion. So great. I think it's important for leaders to create an environment where people do feel empowered, not just empowered to act, but also empowered to speak up. And whether you're talking about the leadership team or the people that you work for, you want to make sure that they understand that you don't want a bunch of sycophants and yes, sirs, surrounding you. You want individuals who are going to tell you exactly what they think. And you want them to feel confident that they're going to be able to tell you that in a very straightforward way. and not be slapped down as a result. And that's critically important because you want to have that combination of leader and leadership team that's going to be able to work together. And picking up on something that Bill said, leaders have to realize that everything they say and they do watched intensively by individuals around them. And they are role models every moment of the day. And so you have to actually live the types of things that you're talking about. Because if you say one thing but do something else, there's a real inconsistency there. And people are going to say, well, he may say or she may say that, but that's not really what they're trying to advocate. And something very simple that I did when I was at the agency, I was a very strong advocate for a variety of reasons for LGBT rights at CIA. Because for too many years, individuals of that community were not treated appropriately. And so my lanyard at CIA was a rainbow lanyard with my agency badge, and I walked throughout the agency with that. And I must tell you, there were so many people who would come up to me and say, thank you for demonstrating your commitment to this cause. So I think there are things that leaders can do on a daily basis that can be simple, but really going to send a very clear signal to people that this is something that you believe in, these are your principles, and you're going to make sure you stand behind them. And yes, there'll be people who will criticize you for it, and that's where public opinion will come in. And my father used to tell me, if you can look yourself in the mirror, every day and say, you took the right decisions because you believe that they were the right things to do, that's fine. You will always have, the naysayers and knuckleheads out there. But you have to make sure that you're able to live to your principles, because at the end of the day, that's the one that you really need to make sure that you take care of.
That's actually a great segue into my next question, which again, I'm going to reverse order again, put it right back at you, but that I want to hear from all of our panelists. The relationship between leadership and morality. Is leadership just a skill, or is there a real moral dimension to it? And if so, how would you unpack that? You've each alluded to this in different ways, but I'd like to hear some further reflections. And Director Brennan, you gave a very thoughtful lecture on this here on campus a couple months ago, so we'll tee you up first.
Yeah, I spoke about the ethos of intelligence and the ethics of intelligence, and I think it's critically important because I think there is a morality that we all need to sort of abide by. As I mentioned before, that morality, at least in my life, was instilled in me early on by my parents, by my family, by my early educators. And it was something that I tried to live up to through the course of my life. It becomes part of your DNA at a very early age. And if you are not living by that morality early on, when you get into the leadership positions, are you going to really be able to then adapt? And so to me, I think it's critically important that, yes, you need to make sure that you adhere to the letter of the law, but also the spirit of the law, as well as, and morality is a subjective term, I realize that, but I do think that there is, in essence, a distinction between right and wrong. And a lot of times there are difficult policy decisions and you have, a variety of, bad options. But frequently, when it comes down to some of the decisions that leaders have to make, individual leaders really know what the right thing is to do. It may be hard, it may be difficult, it may be that you're going to be roundly criticized and you're going to be facing some really turbulent waters. But doing the right thing at difficult times is really, I think, what distinguishes, the good leaders from those who fail to meet that standard.
Yeah, I'm not sure I can add much to that. I think John's exactly right. The examples that you see today, though, where leadership is failing, I would offer is because it was a failure of their kind of moral underpinnings. And so I think you can build great organizations that are really a house of cards because they don't have a moral or an ethical foundation. So you can win national championships, you can win gold medals, you can bring in great donor gifts, you can have a great business going. But if there is not a solid foundation under that at the very top and hopefully throughout the culture, eventually it's going to collapse. And when it collapses big. And I think when you go back and look at the organizations that we represent here, are there bad people in the organizations? Of course there are. But the culture, certainly in the military and in the intelligence agencies, and I'm sure at HUD as well, it's about doing things, again, that are moral, legal, and ethical. There was a sense of duty, honor, and country. Now, not everybody adhered to that, but that was the gold standard that we strive for. And if you can't at least strive for that and do the best you can to live up to that, then your organization will falter at some time. And when it does, it will take everybody with it.
Secretary Castro.
Well, yeah, I completely agree that ultimately, if you don't have that moral anchor, then you're not going to be an effective leader over the long run. But let me just address this in a way that I think also may be relevant, especially to the students in the audience, which is, when I first thought about going into politics, one of the things that I wondered, and frankly, one of the things that gave me pause, was whether you could go into politics and lead and succeed in it and still be yourself at the other end of it, or whether you would lose who you are because you had to compromise so much. Because I bet that if we asked folks who had gone in the wrong direction, let's say they've been a leader or in an organization for 25 years or something, and then something happened and they went in the wrong direction, it's usually not just one moment, right? It's people get off track somehow. What I've found so far is that the answer is that you absolutely can stay true to your convictions. And still, of course, when it comes to policy or implementation of things, make the kind of compromises that you're gonna have to make, because nobody is ever gonna get 100% of what they want when they're leading, or even when they're just any part of the organization. But for those of y'all that wonder the same thing, can I still be myself? At least what I have found is that the answer is that yes, you can be. If you are that person who is honest, who has a core, then you absolutely can remain that in politics, in electoral politics, and still come out on the other side.
Admiral Inman.
Leadership by example. Be conscious of the fact that you are being observed wherever you go, what you do. And sometimes that speaks louder than the words you say about leadership. I was particularly concerned as I got to my first flag job, Director of Naval Intelligence, we were going through congressional hearings, allegations of illegal activities everywhere. And to me, it was very important to make sure the workforce understood they could do what they needed to do for the country within the law. And where there was ambiguity, I began at that stage going and working with Congress to get laws enacted to do it. That led to the FISA court, which is now going through a flap, a lot of other things. But I found that helping set up the post-Church and Pike Committee congressional oversight, which sometimes works well, sometimes doesn't work well in the process. But it was a reality. Most of the intelligence work was being done under high levels of classification. Simple reason to protect sources and methods. And so how did you convince the public that you were abiding by the law? And that's why I turned to the congressional committees. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work that well. And I would say the bulk of the times when it didn't work well, it wasn't the problem with the agencies. It was because it became a partisan issue on the Hill in the process. But the lead by example, I cannot overemphasize. Grab the opportunity to go take a leadership role, and sometimes on very difficult issues. I shared with John, I tackled the whether or not people who had declared that they were homosexual could continue to be employed in the intelligence community. Sat down a wonderful general counsel, walked through what were the government's interests. Once we satisfied those, put in procedure to protect it, then declared that that was the case. Great support from the Secretary of Defense, from the President, from Senator Goldwater, from Congressman Micah. And when the media got a hold of it and great uproar, it only lasted 24 hours, because when Bob Woodward went to see Senator Goldwater, and he said he did exactly the right thing in the process. So it was confronting barriers that did not serve the national interest. That is a leadership issue.
So next question. Even our greatest leaders, and I'm sitting with 4 of them here, are human. And of course, to be human means to be fallible and means to make the occasional mistake. So any of you want to, and I'm putting this open here, but I just may call on one of you if I don't get a response. Any of you, can you recall any mistakes that you ever made as a leader? How did you address it? How did you learn from it?
There's so many, I don't know where to start.
Yeah, I'm having a challenge narrowing it down to the one mistake I want to talk about. But it picks up on something Bobby said earlier. When I first became a manager and then a leader of the people in the group that I was in, I had one day been a peer within that group and then was elevated to lead it. And there were individuals who were older and more senior than I was. And I didn't have the appropriate, I think, training experience and preparation for that. And so for my first 2 weeks, I had become a bit of a overbearing and not a very good leader or manager. And so the group was starting to not fall apart, but it was known that things weren't going well. And my supervisor at the time called me into my office and said, "John, you've changed so much." I said, "What?" He said, we selected you to be this branch chief because of the qualities and traits that you had exhibited. Good teamwork, empathy, being a real team player. He said, now that you have become this leader, you are not doing the same things that really got you to where you were. And so, and I took a very honest look at myself, and I was making mistakes. And so what I did was I sat down with each one of the individuals in the group and said, "I've screwed up. I really need to understand, how to be a better leader. And I want your thoughts on what it is that you are looking to me for." And it was quite a eye-opening experience for me, and one that I'm glad I experienced early on, because that experience, as painful as it was for me and for them, I think it was something that had better prepared me for the subsequent opportunities to lead people in the future.
Yeah, I always tell folks that if you're in charge of an organization, you have to own that organization's failure. Not just your failure, but the organization's failure, because you're in charge of the organization. And I want to give kind of 3 quick examples. If you recall back when we had the BP oil spill off in the Gulf, you had these horrific scenes of oil spread out throughout the entire Gulf, birds covered in oil, small mom and pop fishing stores that were devastated by the oil. And at one point in time, a reporter went to the CEO of BP, and this had been going on for a couple of weeks now. And he said, what are you thinking right now? And the CEO of BP said, "I just want to get back to my life. I just want to get back to my life." He was supposed to be going on vacation, and unfortunately couldn't make the vacation. Needless to say, he was fired very quickly, rightfully so.
And so he got back to that life.
And he got back to that life.
Right. Yeah, a lot of time to get back to life. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But another quick example, I was giving some remarks to an international bank one time. And before I had gone in to do these remarks, I had gone on the bank's website. And on the bank's website, a cookie popped up. And the cookie was, whoever didn't particularly care for this bank was prominently displayed on their website. And it happened to be this guy, Jason. And Jason was saying, this bank is okay, but every time I call, nobody picks up the phone. I go into the local bank and they don't treat me very well. And then he just ripped the bank apart. So there were 600 of these very senior members of this international bank. And I said, and the CEO was sitting down front. And I said, "So what would y'all have done in this situation?" And about 3 or 4 guys raised their hand, and I kind of pointed. He goes, "Oh, we'd take down the website." I said, "Yeah, that's not exactly the answer I was looking for." I said, "Well, let me tell you, if I was the CEO, I'd find out who Jason was, and I would call Jason and say, 'What do I need to do to make this right by you?'" And they said, "Why would you do, you're the CEO, you don't have time to call Jason." And my point was, then you don't understand what it takes to be a CEO, because that's exactly what you need to do. You've got to take care of your customers, your employees, your staff, your faculty, because you own the problem as the CEO. Now let me fast forward, because back to what everybody said here, I've got more mistakes than I can line up, but a couple of them that were very painful. We had a very serious civilian casualty incident in Afghanistan. Some of my forces went in inadvertently, not not inadvertently, we got into a firefight and ended up killing a couple of Afghan policemen that were the sons of one of the village elders. And it was just a horrific incident. And it was in a very sporty part of Afghanistan. And I realized that, this was easy for me. I was 3 levels above this, the decision makers that had kind of gone in to do this, but I own this organization. So I went down to meet with the father of the of his 2 sons that had been killed, and came into this Afghan village, and it was me and one other officer, and needless to say, they were not happy. And about 200 came into this little town hall meeting, and I apologized to the father, and I explained to him the actions that we'd taken and where we'd gone wrong. I didn't know how the father was going to take it. And to his credit, he accepted my apology. But what came of that was that all of a sudden the fact that an senior American officer had come down to apologize for such an egregious, act in the middle of a war zone meant a lot to the Afghans. And all of a sudden that little part of that province began to change. And so the unintended consequence, I didn't go down there assuming that would happen, but I went down there understanding that this is my responsibility. This is on me. Somehow I failed to either train the guys or teach the guys, or a decision wasn't made at the right level that caused this civilian casualty to occur. I own that. And so I would tell you, wherever you are in the organization, if you have people below you, this is not about, well, look, I'm sorry, this guy screwed up or this woman screwed up, no, you own that. You're the person in charge.
All right, well, please join me in a warm round of applause for this fantastic conversation. Very well done.
Thank you for listening to the first episode of Horns of a Dilemma, our new podcast with the University of Texas and the Texas National Security Review. Do not forget to subscribe to the feed itself on your podcast app of choice.